This is Professor Stephen Litch in the Principles of Economics, and I'm going to talk about the benefit of an economy to the consumers and producers in it. Okay, so benefit, we mean the value, the happiness that the market brings to these people. Economists have a standard, like our ideal outcome for a market is what we call efficient. It maximizes the total surplus to all the people in the economy. Okay, and so to think of what an efficient allocation would be, we imagine a benevolent social planner gets to run the economy. This benevolent social planner can control how much is produced in the economy, controls who produces it, controls who gets the output, and this social planner has a single objective. They want to do what brings the greatest benefit to society. Okay, so let me give an example of an economy. Uh, First, I'm going to address this question of, actually, before I give my example, let me talk about this issue of who produces what. If there are different manufacturers in the economy and they all have different costs of producing widgets, maybe some are more efficient and can produce low cost widgets, some have higher costs, then naturally, if the social planner wants to benefit society as much as possible, the first manufacturers that the planner will ask to produce widgets will be the ones who have the lowest costs of production. And similarly, when it comes to the question of who gets what, imagine that there are different people in the economy who have different values that they associate with widgets. One person might value a widget at $80. Another might value it at $110. Another might value it at $100. Well, in order to make society as happy as possible, the social planner should first give widgets to the people with the highest values. Okay, so those two parts are fairly simple. The first widgets get produced by the manufacturers with the lowest costs of producing widgets, and the first widgets are given to the people who have the highest values for widgets. Okay, now let me move to a hypothetical economy. In this economy, we have 6 consumers who might want to have a widget. So first person values a widget at $130, second person values it at $120, and so forth. Also, there are 6 firms that could manufacture widgets. The first one could do it at a cost of $40, second at a cost of $60, and so forth. Now, this benevolent social planner has to make decisions about whether to produce widgets. So thinks about the first widget. It would bring a value of $130 to someone, but it would cost $40 to produce. So that would in fact generate $90 of surplus. The value minus the cost would be $90. And a second widget, if produced, would generate 120 minus 60 equals $60 of surplus. Okay, so the social planner goes through all the widgets and evaluates the amount of surplus the widgets would produce. Next, the social planner decides whether producing each widget is worthwhile. The first widget would generate $90 of surplus, so yes, it's worth producing. It brings more value to society than the cost. The second widget brings $60 of value to society, so again, it's worth producing. The third brings $30 of value, worth producing. The fourth one, it brings $100 of value, it costs $100. So there's really no surplus generated by it. So it's kind of indifferent whether to produce that. Economists typically just say, let's go ahead and produce it. It doesn't cause any harm. But then the fifth widget costs more, 120, than the value it brings to people, 90. So that's one that the social planner would not want to produce. And the same for the sixth. The value it brings to a person is less than the cost of producing it. So again, don't produce the sixth widget. In other words, the optimal quantity to produce is 4. And that optimal quantity is denoted here as Q hat. That little symbol on top of the Q is called a hat. Um, and so Q hat equals 4. That's what maximizes surplus in the economy. Okay, great. The social planner now knows what to do, how many widgets to produce, 4, and to whom to give the widgets. The 4 people who have the highest value for widgets. Finally, who produces the widgets? The 4 firms with the lowest cost. So that is exactly what is socially optimal in this economy. But next, let's forget about the benevolent social planner because I want to show what would happen in a market economy, a competitive market for widgets. Okay, if we had people with these preferences in the value column, um, they would generate a demand curve, right? So I've drawn that here at a price of 130. That's about here. One widget is demanded at a price of 120, two, and so forth. Okay, and then there's also a supply curve, which is based on the cost of producing widgets. One widget would be produced if the price were $40. A second widget would be produced if the price were $60. So that comes from right here. Okay, and the market will be in equilibrium where supply and demand intersect. Okay, so right here I've drawn that equilibrium point. The equilibrium price would be 100 and the quantity produced would be 4. So here's the interesting thing. The market equilibrium production, Q star, is 4 widgets. What the social planner would determine is optimal for society is producing 4 widgets. Those are the same. On top of that, who gets the widgets is the same. In the social planner's ideal world, the 4 people who got widgets all valued widgets at $100 or more. That's the same as in the market equilibrium because when the price was 100, only people who valued widgets at $100 or more would purchase them. The social planner determined that the firms manufacturing widgets would be the 4 with lowest costs. Okay, and all of them ended up having production costs of 100 or less. Now, the market, the same 4 companies produce widgets. When the price of a widget is $100, suppliers who can produce widgets for $100 or less will produce them. So, what happens in the competitive market, which is completely disorganized, no one is like dictating what should be done, but what happens in the competitive market is exactly the same as what a person would choose, like a planner would choose in order to maximize the total benefit for everyone. The same people produce widgets, the same people receive widgets, the same number of widgets are produced. Okay, this is actually a very profound, maybe philosophical statement. The market equilibrium produces the exact outcome that is socially optimal. Now, I should add a caveat to that. In an ideal market, okay? In an ideal market, the market equilibrium is exactly the outcome that would maximize total surplus for everyone. And when I say an ideal market, I really have 3 things in mind. First, everyone in the market has accurate information about the quality, value of the goods, they know what they are purchasing, and so forth. Second, no market power. Nobody has undue influence on the other side of the market. For example, no monopolies that can dictate either you buy something at my price or you get nothing at all. And no employers who say either you work for me at the wage that I offer or no other way, or you have no job. We're talking about a competitive market where, for example, if a worker does not like the offer from one employer, the worker can go to another employer who makes a better offer. Okay, so no side of the market has unfair influence over the others. And the final characteristic of an an ideal market is that there are no externalities. Remember, externalities are behaviors that impact people who were not part of the economic decision, essentially impact third parties, people who did not agree to the transaction. Now, as I said, this statement about the market equilibrium is the outcome that will maximize surplus. That sort of gives us some policy recommendations. It says that nobody can improve on the competitive market outcome. Uh, Anyone who tries to restrict the production thinks that maybe we can benefit people by restricting production or ordering more production or raising wages or capping prices. None of those can improve overall surplus in the market, at least if the market is ideal. Okay, so again, it suggests that a laissez-faire, like a laissez-faire, the term is, let me write it down if I can. Laissez-faire. This first word sounds like lay, say. Okay, this term means just let it be, let everyone do what they want to do. So, in an ideal market, a laissez-faire approach will maximize surplus. But then I might raise a question of whether markets are, in fact, laissez-faire, and it kind of depends on the characteristics of the particular market. Um, if we were talking about the market for perhaps gasoline, let's go down the list. Do we think consumers have accurate information about what they are purchasing when they buy gasoline? Yeah, I think so. We all know it's fuel. For the most part, all gas companies are selling the same thing. Um, we don't have any particular reason to be concerned that some gas stations have low quality gas. We tend to think we know what we're getting when we purchase gasoline. Second thing, market power. Um, is there one seller of gasoline or even one purchaser who can really dictate the market conditions? I'd say, for the most part, absolutely not. There are so many gas stations locked into competition, trying to sell gas at the lowest price. No concerns about market power on the seller side. On the buyer side, there's so many consumers. None of us could go in and dictate to gas stations how much we're going to pay. So I'm comfortable with the ideas that consumers have accurate information about what they're purchasing. There's no market power. Then we come to no externalities. Does consuming gasoline create externalities? Oh, yeah, it does, right? Puts carbon into the atmosphere, and that's believed to contribute to climate change. Okay, so market for gasoline, not an ideal market. Okay, let's try something different. Some pharmaceutical drug. Okay, so consumers trying to decide whether to buy some type of medicine. First, is there accurate information about what the consumer is buying? Well, maybe that depends. Uh, I believe there is often uncertainty in new drugs. Hopefully, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, ensures that we have accurate information about the effectiveness and about the safety of drugs. So that's kind of an iffy one, whether there is accurate information. Okay. Is there market power? Does one side of the market really have the ability to dictate the price to the other? Yeah. Um, when we're talking about pharmaceuticals, Often, if there is a patented drug, that manufacturer can set the price. And people have a take it or leave it choice. Either purchase the medication at the really high price that the pharmaceutical company is charging, or don't purchase it at all. So that idea of no market power, that doesn't hold up when we're talking about drugs. Okay, so market for drugs, not one of these ideal markets. Uh, Try another one. The market for bread. When I go to the grocery store and I purchase some bread, do I have accurate information about what I'm buying? Probably. I know the ingredients that go into bread. I have an idea that it was produced in a safe, quality environment. And I know what bread does to my body. Okay. Market power. Is there one company that, or one buyer who dictates the market? No. Whole bunch of different companies selling bread. They're all competing for customers. I'm comfortable saying that the that's a pretty competitive market. Okay, moving on to number three, externalities. Are there externalities associated with consuming bread? Not very many. Um, I can't think of how my eating a slice of bread would negatively impact other people or positively impact other people. So I'd be comfortable saying that there are no externalities associated with consuming bread. So, bread, that seems like one of these ideal markets. People know what they're purchasing, it's a competitive market with no externalities. And I'd be comfortable saying that whatever the free market does for bread, that market equilibrium is the best overall for consumers and producers. It maximizes surplus. Okay, so whether we believe that a market really maximizes surplus should really depend on whether we think the market has these characteristics. If it does have these characteristics, then there's no way for any interference or any regulation of the market to improve overall surplus. Okay, so again, an ideal market, there's nothing that can be done to improve overall surplus. But if the market is not ideal, then generally it will fail to maximize surplus. Okay, so let me move on um, to especially the topic of externalities. Externalities are behavior that affects another person who did not consent to the transaction. And we talk about both positive and negative externalities. So, negative externalities, things that a person does that have a negative impact or a cost placed on someone else. And again, like someone who was not part of the decision, someone who did not consent to the decision. The prime example of a negative externality is pollution, environmental pollution. Like a company is producing widgets in a factory that pollutes the river and the air, that those are negative externalities. So pollution by definition is negative externalities. Noise pollution, light pollution, that's a big concern right now with SpaceX's big project of a satellite uh, or an internet satellite constellation called Starlink that would provide internet service to most of the world. The concern is that it causes light pollution. The little satellites up in the sky reflect light back to Earth like stars, and astronomers are upset about that. Okay, so pollution. Other examples of externalities, some of our behaviors that we have, sneezing, coughing, especially without covering our mouths. Of course, flatulence is the big one for my kids. They will argue about who smelt it, dealt it, or who said the rhyme did the crime. But it's something that a person does that inflicts a negative cost on others who did not consent to the outcome. Okay, smoking and alcohol are other things that are associated with negative externalities, or other things that create negative externalities. Remember, though, that externality means the impact on someone else. So when it comes to smoking, the impact of smoking on my own health is not an externality, but the impact on other people of, for example, secondhand smoke, that's the externality. Okay. Similarly for alcohol. Alcohol might cause harm to me personally, but that is not an externality. The externality is the damage that alcohol causes to other people through things like violence and accidents. Um, okay. So I mentioned a big externality that we all create for other people is driving. Okay. Driving is probably the thing we do that is most dangerous to other people. So driving puts other people at risk of collisions, as well as just congestion of driving is another example of an externality. When I put my car on the highway, that slows everyone else down a little bit. So congestion is a type of externality. And finally, I'll mention overuse of common resources, like fishing from a common stock of fish or hunting wildlife. When I hunt a deer, that reduces the number of deer available to other people. Okay, then positive externalities are the flip side of this. Things that we can do that have a positive impact on other people. A great example would be vaccinations. Remember, vaccinations have a benefit to me personally. When I get vaccinated against measles, it reduces the chance that I get measles. But the external benefit, the positive externality, is that if I'm less likely to get measles, I'm less likely to pass it on. And so all of those other people who do not get measles from me got a benefit from my vaccination. That's the idea behind herd immunity, is essentially vaccinations have an external benefit to other people by reducing the chance that the other people get sick. Okay, vaccinations are a great example of a positive externality. Things like wearing face masks and washing hands. One of the things that we have tried to learn over the past half year is to wear face masks, not just for our own benefits. Like I wear a face mask that reduces the chance that I breathe in a virus, but also we wear face masks for other people's benefit. In case I am infected, it filters out the air that I exhale. So that's the positive externality. I think that's the thing that's been hard for some people to appreciate about the face mask mandates is that external benefit. They might think of their own cost benefit analysis for face mask and decide that for them personally, the discomfort of wearing a face mask is not worth the benefit. But what they ignore or what they might overlook is the external benefit. Okay, washing hands is another example of something that has a positive externality. Think of back in the days before COVID when we shook hands with other people. Anything that I had on my hands would be passed on to someone else. A person who, for example, does not wash hands after going to the bathroom, that creates a disgusting negative externality for anyone who shakes hands with them later. Okay, so washing hands is a positive externality. Recycling would be another example of a positive externality, something that we do that benefits other people. Fire protection. So here's an interesting story. From the mid 1600s through the mid 1800s, a lot of fire protection, firefighting essentially, was done by private companies. And it was a choice for a homeowner to purchase fire insurance as well as firefighting. Same company would provide both. Um, so which is interesting on its own. That these two businesses, fire insurance and firefighting, were combined. If you purchased a policy, then when your house caught on fire, the company would send over firefighters to try to extinguish it. If they couldn't extinguish it, then they would pay for the damages that were caused to your house. So it was neat because the incentives were aligned. In order to reduce the insurance costs, they wanted to fight fire effectively. Anyhow, from the mid 1600s until the mid 1800s, a lot of firefighting in Britain and the United States was done through private companies. But fire protection creates a positive externality for my neighbors in the same way that a vaccination does. If my burning house is likely to get, or if my burning house is left to burn, it's likely to set the houses around me on fire. That's a negative externality. Having someone extinguish my burning house will save the houses around me. So that provides a positive externality. Um, okay, so the last thing on my list, honeybees, as an example of a positive externality. A beekeeper might purchase honeybees for the purpose of producing honey. Okay, but the honeybees go about their day finding flowers, sucking out nectar, and as they do that, they inadvertently pollinate crops and fruits and other crops, fruits, flowers, which provide a benefit to neighboring farms, for example, or neighboring gardens. So owning honeybees provides a positive externality to others in the area. Okay, so what happens in the market when there is an externality? First, let's talk about the same market for widgets and evaluate the total surplus, or to put this another way, what a social planner would do if there's a negative externality. Suppose there's a $40 cost, or like external cost, $40 of damage caused by producing a widget. Okay, every single widget causes that. Then the social planner thinks about the surplus generated from producing each widget. The first widget, for example, the value to someone is $130. It would take up $40 of resources and cause $40 of damage to the rest of society. But still, when calculating the value minus the direct costs and minus the external damage, the net benefit, the surplus, is $50. The second widget, if that were produced, it would bring $150 of value to someone. It costs $60 of resources to produce. It causes $40 of damage to the rest of society, but still the net benefit is $20. But when it comes to the third widget, the value would be $110 minus the costs of production and minus the external damage gives surplus of negative $10. Okay, negative surplus. In other words, it harms society to produce the third widget and any of these later widgets, the fourth, fifth, or sixth. So as the social planner is trying to decide the optimal amount to produce, the first widget, yes, that brings more value to society than the costs and damages. Same for the second widget, but not the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth. So in this case, the optimal quantity in order to maximize total surplus in society is 2 widgets. Okay, produce 2 widgets in order to maximize total surplus. But nothing would change in a competitive market. In a competitive market, buyers ignore externalities and sellers ignore externalities. That is the definition of an externality, things that the people involved in the transaction ignore. Okay, and so the competitive market still produces and consumes four widgets. There are four people who value widgets at $100 or more, four companies that will produce widgets at $100 or less. So if the price is $100, there will be a market equilibrium. End of story. Okay. Again, the competitive market will overproduce anything that causes a negative externality. And that's the statement right here. The competitive equilibrium is more than what is socially optimal. Now let me do an example with a positive externality. Still, the same values and costs for widgets. The externality is $30 of benefit to the rest of society. So the social planner does calculations of the surplus generated from producing the first widget. That's $130 of value to the person who gets it, plus another $30 of value to the rest of society, 160 minus the cost of 40 gives a total surplus of 120 for producing the first widget. Producing the second widget generates $90 of surplus. The third, fourth, fifth. Okay, so when it comes to the optimal output with this positive externality is producing 5 widgets. And remember, what a competitive market would do is still produce only 4. The buyers and sellers ignore the fact that they are causing benefit to other members of society. Okay, so the general principle is whenever there's a positive externality, the the amount that the competitive market produces, Q star, is less than what is socially optimal.